Hi, Ben here and welcome back to another Work in Progress Wednesday. So we're in this sort of outside area where I've got my forge and my anvil and my power hammer, and today what we're working on is we're working on forging some bowl turning hook tools. So what I do is I take a piece of EN43J, so this is basically spring steel, and when I first started making bowl hooks I'd actually use recycled car springs, cut them so that I'd got an individual ring and then straighten the bar and then turn them into hook tools. But you can imagine that's quite a lot of work, quite a lot of energy. So now what I do is I buy the proper spring steel in bar lengths and cut it up to approximately a length like that. It's about sort of 16 inches long, something like that. And that will be forged into a blank for the bowl turning hook tools. So what I tend to do is the sort of external and the internal bevel tools, I'll just turn them into this sort of like blank like that. For the crank tools, I'll end up forging them a little bit flatter so they're a bit stronger for the actual curved tools. But what we'll do is we'll get these forged and then we'll be grinding the rough bevels on them so that we can then forge the actual hook on there. But first job to do is fire up the gas forge. I've had this forge for a long time, so we'll fire this. This is a Swan forge made down the road in Tewkesbury, so that uses LPG gas, so we'll fire that up, get some steel hot, and then we can start forging it. So we've got 6 bars of that EN43 in the forge. We've got a few of them up to temperature, so some of them are really coming up to that nice working temperature. The big advantage of using a gas forge over a coke or charcoal forge is that there's less fear of actually scorching the steel. Sometimes you've probably heard the expression too many irons in the fire. That comes from a blacksmithing terminology. So basically if you've got too many bits that you're working on, you can actually burn them away. But with the gas forge we can regulate the temperature so I can have multiple irons in the fire and keep working them. So until very recently, probably about 5 years ago, I got a power hammer, but up until that point all it was the anvil, a big Hoffy hammer and a bit of elbow grease. And what I started to get was a pretty bad tennis elbow from just the repetition of hammering out the tool steel. When you're forging tool steel you'll find that it moves a lot harder. Even when you've got it up to working temperature, it's a lot harder to actually move the material with the hammer than mild steel. So it is a tougher thing to work with, but I'll show you how I used to do it. So you bring it out to the anvil, and then I'm using the cross peen of the hammer to spread the steel, so we're spreading it out, and then I draw down the edges and then continue the process. But I'm giving it some welly and you can see it has moved a bit of the steel, but it's pretty tough. And as soon as you lose that temperature you pop it back in and get it back up to temperature. And then obviously you've got another one up to temperature ready to go. A slightly easier way of doing it. So my power hammer is a bit sort of quirky. A local blacksmith made it for me and it uses a spare wheel off a car and a motor, and it's pretty simple. Turn on the electric motor and then we've got a treadle that moves that wheel, and then we've got 25 kilos of lead and these die plates, and that will help spread the steel. So this gets a bit noisy now, so I'm going to put my ear defenders on and we'll show you what it does. So already that bit of power hammer work has drawn it to almost like a point, and then all I do is I just dress it a little bit with a hammer. And then we'll pop that back in the forge just to get it up to temperature again. So that's pretty much forged out the right thickness that I want. So while it's still warm, it's not red hot, but it's still hot enough just to straighten it. And then at that stage, what I tend to do is I pick the smoothest side for the back side of the tool, and then the side where the bevels are going to get ground, I turn that uppermost, and at that stage I'm going to put my little maker's mark on there. So choose a section where the bevel's not going to interfere with it. Hammer that in, and that just puts a nice little maker's mark on that bolt turning hook tool. I'll just check that it hasn't curved the tool again. And then what I'll do is I'll let that cool nice and slowly, and I normally just put those in a bucket of vermiculite just so that they can cool nice and slowly. So I've got some of the blanks that I forged earlier today, and they're already cooled, so I can start working on them on the next process. So the next stage is to clean up that profile, and then I'm going to grind the pre-bevels in there basically before I shape the hook. So what I tend to use for that is a little buddy grinder. So this is made by Chris Wilmont out in America. Real handy little grinder, perfect with the tool rest on there because I can do the profiling. And then I can use one of these little wheels on the platen itself to actually plunge in there and do the bevels. So I'll stick some specs on and my grinding cap, and we'll fire up this grinder and start getting that profile. So obviously I've got the side that's got my maker's mark, so that's going to be the side that the bevels get ground on. So I've just cleaned it up to bright metal, and then what I'll do then is use the wheel itself to clean up the reverse side of that hook tool and get that all nice and polished. So now we've got a really nice polished piece of steel for the rear of the tool. So now we're going to start thinking about putting those bevels in there. So what I do first is just knock a bit of the worst off with the platen before we get that nice sweeping radius. Right, so we've got the bevels ground, and what I've done is I've changed the grit, so now it's a much finer finish on these tools. It's pretty much created a burr, so it's almost a cutting edge, and at that stage I'm ready to actually forge that hook into it. So I'll get a few more prepared and then we'll forge a few hooks. So we've ground the hook tool, we've got the forge back up and running. Now the hook tools that I make, they're double beveled. Some people ask me whether they need a right or a left-handed bolt turning hook tool. Well, you don't really need to worry because they're double beveled. You can either use it right or left-handed. It means that you can do undercuts and you can do cuts from the top. So basically you've got lots of tools in one hook tool. So what we're going to do now is we're going to pop it in the forge. We only need to heat up that first couple of inches, and then I'm going to use my very special extra little small anvil anvil that goes in the hardy hole of the anvil, and this is nice and tight diameter, so I can forge the hook around there. I've got my special hammer that I've used for years. I couldn't find it a few minutes ago, so I started to panic. But that little anvil and that little hammer should work nicely just to forge the hook. And what I'll be doing is I'll be striking down the sort of keel of that sort of hook tool where the two bevels meet. So I'll pop it in the forge, get it nice and hot, and then we should be able to forge it. So you've pretty much got one chance at it. Because they're so thin, you want to make sure that you don't heat it too much, and then very carefully hit that keel. And what I was doing in those last few strokes was I was trying to make sure that the hook was in line with the whole shaft of the tool. If you have it cranked off to the side, you'll find when you use it on the bowl turning, it will catch and it will swivel in your hand. So it's important that it's all nice and in line. So this is our external hook tool, so the bevel's on the outside, and I give it this nice sort of question mark shape, so you should be able to do lots of different cuts with that particular tool. So that's ground, forged. All I need now is to heat treat it, so we'll heat it up, quench it in oil to harden it, and then we'll pop it in an oven and temper it for a couple of hours, and then obviously sharpen it. So yeah, that's one of our bowl turning hook tools. That's how we go about making them and forging them. And if you don't know what we use this tool for, remember to check out our bowl turning videos on our YouTube channel. Now, we made those very many years ago, and we only had a very basic camera, so yes, there's wind noise. Lots of people ask us about redoing those videos, which we might do at some stage, but if you want to see what this actual tool is used for, then check out those videos and you'll see the younger Ben Orford in his heyday. But anyway, that's what we've been working on this Wednesday. Hope you've enjoyed seeing a little bit of blacksmithing or a bit of forging, a little bit different to what we normally do. And remember to subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you next time.